September 12th, 1943, 2:23 in the afternoon, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. The humidity hung thick enough to taste. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Yamada sat at a wooden desk inside a canvas tent, the fabric walls breathing in and out with the tropical wind. Sweat darkened the collar of his flight suit. His right eye, the one that still worked, scanned the intelligence report for the third time. The Americans had a new fighter. They called it the Hellcat. Around him, younger pilots crowded close, their faces still smooth, unmarked by the kind of experience that carves lines into a man's features. They smelled of aviation fuel and youth and absolute certainty. Yamada had worn that same certainty once before Guadalcanal, before the bullet, before the glass. "Sensei," one of them asked, using the term of respect reserved for teachers and masters. "Should we be concerned?" Yamada looked up. His left eye was sharp, dark, reading the concern beneath the question. His right eye was a ruin, the lid half closed over scar tissue and blindness. The socket still ached when the weather changed. It was aching now. He read aloud from the report. Grumman F6F3 Hellcat, Pratt & Whitney R2800, double Wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower, maximum speed 376 miles per hour, gross weight 12,186 pounds. The tent fell silent except for the rhythmic whisper of palm fronds outside. Then someone laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Another pilot joined in. Within seconds, the entire tent rippled with its genuine, unforced mirth. These men were the finest naval aviators in the Imperial Japanese Navy. They had dominated the skies for 2 years. They flew the Mitsubishi A6M0, the most elegant fighting machine ever conceived. The Zero weighed 6,025 pounds, half the American plane. It turned on a coin. It climbed like it was being pulled by wires into heaven. It was an extension of the pilot's will, as responsive as thought itself. 12,000 pounds. The Americans had built a fighter that weighed as much as a bomber. "Another flying brick," someone said. "Like the Wildcat, but heavier." "They keep trying to replace skill with steel," another voice added. Yamada said nothing. He set the report down on the desk, his fingers pressing flat against the damp paper. Through the tent opening, he could see 3 Zeros parked on the coral hardstand, their metal skins gleaming in the equatorial sun. Sleek aircraft, efficient, every gram of unnecessary weight stripped away. What remained was speed and grace and lethality. The Hellcat from the photographs intelligence had provided looked like it had been designed by men who built tractors. The laughter continued around him. But Takeshi Yamada did not laugh. 1 year and 35 days earlier, he had learned something about certainty. August 7th, 1942, 11:47 in the morning, 23,000 feet above Guadalcanal. The mission had been routine until it wasn't. Yamada led a flight of 6 Zeros, providing cover for bombers, hitting the American positions near Henderson Field. The sky was clean blue infinite. Below the jungle was a carpet of green violence. Between sky and jungle, men fought and died. 64 confirmed victories. Yamada wore them like armor, invisible but real. He had been flying combat since China, since before most of these young pilots had learned to shave. 817 hours in the cockpit. He knew the Zero's limitations the way a swordsman knows the balance point of his blade. The Wildcats came from below, climbing hard, their radial engines bellowing. Grumman F4, F4S, stubby, graceless, slow. But there were 12 of them, and they were angry. Yamada called the break. His flight scattered, each Zero choosing its dance partner. The Americans didn't try to turn fight. They had learned that lesson in blood. Instead, they used their speed in the dive, their structural strength, trying to boom and zoom to hit and run. Yamada selected a Wildcat, pulled the Zero into a climbing turn that would have torn the wings off any American plane. The Wildcat tried to follow, stalled, fell away. Yamada rolled inverted, watched the enemy fighter tumble below him, lined up the shot. The windscreen exploded, not exploded, shattered. A spider web of cracks spreading from a single point where a 7.7mm round from another Wildcat had punched through from behind. Yamada hadn't seen him, hadn't heard him. The American had come from his blind spot, the sector his wingman was supposed to protect. Glass fragments peppered his face like tiny knives. Hot metal kissed his right temple. The world turned red. He felt the bullet. Not pain, not yet, but impact. A hammer blow to the skull, just above the right ear. His head snapped sideways. Something warm and thick flooded his right eye. Blood. His own blood. The color of the rising sun. The Zero pitched forward. Yamada's hands left the controls. For 3 seconds he counted them later in the hospital, over and over. His hands were not on the stick. 3 seconds at 250 miles per hour in a 45-degree dive with enemy fighters above and jungle below. Instinct brought his left hand back first. He pulled. The Zero responded. It always responded. 1,500 feet above the jungle canopy, the aircraft leveled. Yamada could not see out of his right eye. He turned his head, using only the left. The world had become a narrow tunnel of partial vision. His wingman was gone, dead or fled. It didn't matter. His face was wet. Blood ran down his neck, soaked into his flight suit. He tried to blink his right eye clear. It wouldn't clear. The lid felt wrong, heavy, damaged. The radio crackled, voices shouting in Japanese, the fight continuing somewhere above and behind him. Yamada checked his instruments with his one good eye. Fuel 68 gallons remaining, oil pressure normal, engine temperature normal, airspeed 190 knots. Distance to Rabaul 560 nautical miles. Flight time at cruise speed approximately 4 hours and 50 minutes. Fuel endurance at 28 gallons per hour, approximately 5 hours and 17 minutes. The numbers were close, too close, but they worked, barely. He pointed the Zero north and began the longest flight of his life. The pain arrived at the 30-minute mark. Not the sharp pain of the initial impact, but a deep, grinding ache that radiated from his skull down into his teeth. His right eye socket felt full of broken glass. He wanted to touch it, to probe the damage, to understand what had been taken from him. He kept both hands on the controls. At 1 hour, he vomited into his oxygen mask. The mask filled with bile. He ripped it off, let it hang against his chest, breathed the thin air directly. At 23,000 feet, every breath tasted like ice and emptiness. At 2 hours, he began to hallucinate. His wife appeared in the cockpit beside him, sitting on air, her face serene. She wore the kimono from their wedding day, white silk embroidered with cranes. She said nothing. She simply looked at him with infinite patience. When he turned his head to see her clearly, she vanished. At 3 hours, the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The light changed from white to gold to amber. Yamada's shadow, cast by the lowering sun, stretched across the cockpit instruments. He watched it move like the hand of a clock, marking time. At 4 hours and 12 minutes, his vision in the left eye began to blur. Shock, maybe. Blood loss, probably. He blinked hard, forced focus. The compass swam in front of him. North. Hold north. Rabaul was north. Home was north. At 4 hours and 37 minutes, he saw the coastline. New Britain, the volcanic mountains rising from the sea. Relief flooded through him, almost as disabling as the pain. Not yet. Not yet. 10 more minutes, maybe 15. The fuel gauge showed 7 gallons. The needle rested just above empty. He could see Rabaul now, the harbour, the airfield. Tiny rectangles of coral and palm trees. He began his descent, trading altitude for distance gliding as much as flying. At 4 hours and 43 minutes, the engine coughed. Fuel starvation. The last gallon sloshing in the tank, too little to feed the engine consistently. The propeller windmilled, driving the engine without combustion. Yamada had perhaps 60 seconds of partial power remaining, maybe less. The airfield was 3 miles ahead. He could see figures on the ground, now small as ants. Someone must have heard the engine note change. People were running. 2 miles. The engine coughed again, caught, ran rough. Black smoke trailed behind him. 1 mile. He lowered the landing gear manually, the mechanical system grinding. No hydraulics for the wounded, the dying, just cables and muscle. 1/2 mile. The engine seized completely. The propeller stopped frozen in space. The sudden silence was total and terrible. Only the whistle of wind over the wings. Only the hammer of his heart. He was too low for a normal approach, too high to land immediately. The mathematics of glide ratio and distance played out in his exhausted mind. He had one chance. The Zero descended like a leaf, graceful, even in failure. The wheels touched coral. The aircraft bounced, settled, rolled. Yamada's hands remained locked on the stick. He had no memory of lowering them. The Zero slowed, stopped its engine, dead and cooling. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the canopy exploded open. Hands reached for him. Voices shouted in Japanese, urgent, overlapping. Someone was screaming. He realized distantly that it was him. They pulled him from the cockpit. 47 men later claimed they were first to reach him. Yamada never corrected the number. Let them all be heroes. Let them all claim they touched the ghost who flew home dead. The base surgeon, a man named Ishida, with gentle hands and a permanent expression of sorrow, examined the wound under harsh electric light. Yamada lay on a table that smelled of disinfectant and old blood. Other men's blood. The bullet grazed your skull, Ishida said, his voice clinical detached. Fractured the temporal bone. The impact drove glass fragments into the orbital cavity. Your right eye is destroyed. The optic nerve is severed. I am sorry, Lieutenant Commander. The eye cannot be saved. Yamada said nothing. He stared at the ceiling with his remaining eye. A single bulb burned above him, harsh and unwavering. You should have died, Ishida continued. Blood loss alone should have rendered you unconscious within 30 minutes. The skull fracture should have caused catastrophic bleeding into the brain. By every medical standard, you should not have been capable of controlled flight. But I did fly, Yamada whispered. His voice sounded like gravel. Yes, you flew. 4 hours and 47 minutes with a fractured skull and a destroyed eye. You navigated 560 miles over open ocean. You landed with fuel measured in minutes and 0 engine power. Commander, I do not believe in miracles, but I have no other word for what you accomplished. Yamada closed his left eye. In the darkness, he could still see the cockpit, the instruments, the endless blue sky. He could still feel the stick in his hands, the Zero responding to his will. Man and machine perfectly synchronized. The Zero brought me home, he said. It understood. Ishida said nothing. What could he say? The patient was alive when he should be dead. The eye was gone, but the man remained. By what mathematics or mercy, the surgeon did not know. 3 weeks later, after infection and fever and nights filled with screaming, Takeshi Yamada was declared fit for limited duty. Flight status revoked. New assignment instructor pilot. He would teach the next generation of naval aviators to fly the Zero, to merge with it, to become extensions of its grace and lethality. He would teach them the art of aerial combat as samurai had once taught the art of the sword. He would prepare them to die with honor. September 12, 1943. The tent at Rabaul. The laughter finally fading. Yamada picked up the intelligence report again. His left eye tracked across the specifications. 12,000 pounds, 2,000 horsepower, 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 212 pounds of armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, everything the Zero was not. The Americans had looked at the Zero's philosophy speed through lightness, agility, through sacrifice, and rejected it entirely. They had chosen a different path. Heavier, stronger, slower to turn, but faster in a straight line. Armored, protected, built to bring the pilot home. It violated everything Yamada believed about aerial combat, which meant one of two things. Either the Americans were fools throwing resources at a fundamentally flawed concept, or they understood something he did not. Yamada thought about the bullet that had taken his eye. He thought about the glass that had shredded his face. He thought about the 4 hours and 47 minutes he had flown with his skull fractured and his blood pressure dropping and nothing but will keeping him conscious. The Zero had no armor. By design, by philosophy, the weight saved was translated into performance, into art, into the purity of the samurai ideal victory through skill, not through crude protection. He had survived, barely. Through skill and luck and something the surgeon called a miracle. How many others had not? The question sat in his mind like a stone. Around him, the young pilots were already dismissing the threat. The Hellcat was just another American brute. Heavy, clumsy, no match for the Zero in the hands of a skilled pilot. They had seen Wildcats before. They had defeated them. This would be the same. Yamada wanted to believe them. Part of him, the part that had accumulated 64 victories, the part that had flown home with one eye and a fractured skull, wanted to believe that skill would always triumph over mere machinery. But another part, smaller and quieter, whispered doubt. He looked through the tent opening again. The 3 Zeros sat motionless on the hard stand, their canopies reflecting the sun. Elegant aircraft, the most refined he had ever flown. He loved them the way a swordsman loves a perfect blade, and that perhaps was the problem. You could love a sword, you could perfect your technique until the blade became an extension of your arm. But swords had lost wars before, lost them to muskets, to cannons, to machines that cared nothing for elegance or honor or the purity of single combat. Was the Zero a sword, and was the Hellcat something else entirely? Yamada folded the intelligence report and slipped it into his flight suit pocket. The laughter had stopped. The pilots were filing out of the tent now, heading toward the mess, toward their bunks, toward whatever brief pleasure could be found on a jungle island at the edge of the world. One of them paused at the tent entrance, a young pilot named Kenji Tanaka. 19 years old, bright eyes, quick hands, a natural feel for the aircraft. He reminded Yamada of himself 15 years ago, before China, before the war became something that ate men like a furnace eats wood. "Sensei," Kenji said quietly, "do you think the report is accurate?" Yamada considered the question. He could give the easy answer, the comfortable answer. He could tell this boy that Japanese pilots were superior, that the Zero was invincible, that courage and skill would always triumph. Instead, he told the truth. "I think," Yamada said slowly, "that the Americans learned from their mistakes. They lost badly in the beginning. Their pilots died in aircraft that could not match the Zero. Now they are building something new. Whether it will work, I do not know, but they are trying. That makes them dangerous." Kenji absorbed this, his young face serious. "What should we do?" "Train harder, fly better, teach the new pilots everything we know, and pray." Yamada added that skill still matters more than steel. Kenji nodded and left. Yamada sat alone in the tent. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent. In a few hours, darkness would fall across Rabaul, absolute and complete, the kind of tropical darkness that swallows light and sound and hope. He reached up and touched his right eye socket, a habit he had developed in the hospital and never broken. The scars were thick, ridged, permanent. The eye behind them saw nothing, would never see anything again. He had paid the price for the Zero's philosophy. No armor, no protection, just speed and grace, and the assumption that the pilot's skill would be sufficient. It had been sufficient. He had survived. But survival, he was beginning to understand, was not the same as victory, and maybe, just maybe, the Americans had learned the difference. The intelligence report rustled in his pocket as he stood. 12,000 pounds, 2,000 horsepower, armor, protection. A different philosophy entirely. Takeshi Yamada walked out of the tent into the fading light. The Zeros waited for him, silent and refined. He walked past them without looking, his shadow stretching long across the coral. Behind him in the tent, a second copy of the intelligence report lay on the desk. The name Hellcat was visible in the harsh sunlight, black letters on white paper. The laughter had stopped. But the war, the real war, the one that would determine whether swords or machines inherited the sky, that war was just beginning. June 4th, 1942. Akutan Island, Aleutian Chain, 3:17 in the afternoon. The fog came in low and thick, the kind of fog that turned the world into grey, nothing. Petty Officer Tadashi Koga brought his Zero down through it, the engine coughing, missing, dying by degrees. He had taken ground fire during the raid on Dutch Harbour. Something a rifle round a piece of shrapnel luck running backwards had punctured the oil return line. The engine had perhaps 5 minutes left, maybe less. Koga was 21 years old. He had 73 hours of combat time. He was good, but good didn't matter when the engine seized and the propeller stopped, and gravity became the only force that mattered. He saw the island through a break in the fog. Tundra, marsh grass, no trees, the ground looked soft. It wasn't. The wheels touched. The Zero rolled forward. Then the landing gear punched through the surface into bog beneath, and the aircraft nosed over, hard and sudden. The propeller bent. The engine tore from its mounts. The canopies stayed closed. Koga's neck snapped in the impact. Death came instantly, without pain, without awareness. One moment he was a pilot executing an emergency landing. The next moment he was gone. The Zero sat inverted in the marsh, its tail pointing at the sky. Rain began to fall, then snow. The seasons turned. Winter buried the aircraft in white silence. Spring revealed it again. The red circles on the wings faded, but visible. In July, a Navy patrol found it. By August, the Zero was in a crate on a ship bound for Seattle. By September, it sat in a hangar at Wright Field, Ohio, surrounded by men in uniform who looked at it the way surgeons look at a body on the table. Captain Wallace Edmund Pritchard walked around the aircraft slowly, his shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He was 42 years old, with grey at his temples and a limp from a crash in '38 that had shattered his left femur. He flew testbirds, now experimental aircraft, captured enemy planes. Anything the Army Air Forces wanted, evaluated. The Zero was smaller than he expected, delicate almost. The skin was thin enough to dent with a thumb. The cockpit was cramped, designed for smaller men. Everything about it whispered lightness, efficiency, weight, saved at every possible point. "What do you think?" asked Margaret Catherine Aldrich. She stood beside the aircraft's wing, a clipboard in her hands. 34 years old, sharp-featured, with dark hair, pulled back severely. She worked for Grumman as a structures engineer. The Navy had brought her in to analyze what they'd found. "I think," Pritchard said, running his hand along the wing's leading edge, "that this is the most refined death trap I've ever seen." Aldrich made a note on her clipboard. "Elaborate." "No armor plating, not a pound. The pilot sits behind aluminum skin you could punch through with a screwdriver. Fuel tanks have no self-sealing mechanism. One trace around and the whole thing becomes a torch. The airframe is stressed to maybe 6 Gs. Our planes pull 9-10 in a hard turn." "And yet," Aldrich said, "this aircraft has dominated our fighters for a year." "Because the engineering is brilliant," Pritchard admitted. "Everything's sacrificed for performance. It's light, so it climbs. It's maneuverable, so it turns. It has range we can't match. The design is flawless for what it's meant to do, but what it's meant to do is kill the other guy before he kills you. There's no plan B, no margin for error, no forgiveness." Aldrich walked around to the cockpit, peered inside. "The Japanese philosophy seems to be that superior pilot skill compensates for structural vulnerability." "It does," Pritchard said. "Until it doesn't. Their pilots are excellent, the best we've faced, but excellent pilots still get hit. And when they get hit in this," he tapped the fuselage with his knuckle. The sound was thin, hollow. "They burn." Over the next 3 weeks, Pritchard flew the Zero 17 times. Short hops at first, testing controls, feeling out the aircraft's personality. Then longer flights, mock dogfights against Wildcats and P-40S, pushing the envelope, finding the limits. The Zero was everything the intelligence reports claimed. It turned inside any American fighter. It climbed faster. At low speeds, it was supremely maneuverable, the controls light and responsive. Pritchard could see why Japanese pilots loved it. Flying the Zero was like wearing the aircraft instead of sitting in it, but the flaws were real and fatal. Above 250 miles per hour, the controls stiffened dramatically. The ailerons became heavy, sluggish. A diving attack, the bread and butter of American tactics, rendered the Zero nearly uncontrollable. Pritchard had to use both hands and significant force to roll the aircraft at high speed. At 300 miles per hour, the stick felt like it was set in concrete. At 350, the aircraft vibrated the airframe, flexing in ways that made unpleasant sounds. At 380, Pritchard stopped pushing. The Zero wasn't designed for high-speed flight. It was designed for dogfighting at 200 miles per hour, where agility mattered more than raw speed. He wrote his report in careful, precise language. The Zero was beatable. Not through superior maneuverability, American aircraft would never outturn it, but through energy management. Altitude, speed, hit-and-run attacks that exploited the Zero's high-speed handling deficiencies. Never ever get into a slow-speed turning fight. And when you did hit it, the Zero came apart like paper. Pritchard put 30 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition into a Zero wing during a ground test. The wing disintegrated, the fuel tank behind it ruptured and caught fire. The entire aircraft was engulfed in 90 seconds. "Gentlemen," he told the assembled officers at the debriefing, "we cannot outturn this airplane, but we can outdive it out, climb it at a high altitude, and outgun it. Most importantly, we can build aircraft that bring our pilots home alive. The Zero is a magnificent machine built on a philosophy of acceptable losses. We need to reject that philosophy entirely." Margaret Aldrich took notes throughout the presentation. When it ended, she approached Pritchard with a rolled set of blueprints under her arm. "Grumman has a proposal," she said. "I'd like your opinion." They spread the blueprints across a table in a windowless room that smelled of cigarette smoke and coffee. The drawings showed a fighter aircraft that looked nothing like the Zero. It was thick-bodied, heavy, almost brutish. But the numbers told a different story. "Pratt and Whitney R2800, Aldrich said. pointing to the engine specifications. 2,000 horsepower, nearly double the Zero's output. We estimate a top speed of 376 miles per hour, rate of climb 3,500 feet per minute, combat radius 945 miles with drop tanks. Pritchard studied the drawings. The gross weight 12,186 pounds. He whistled softly. Twice the Zero's weight? Yes, but look at this. She flipped to another page. Cross-sections of the fuselage. 212 pounds of armor plating, cockpit engine oil cooler, bulletproof windscreen, self-sealing fuel tanks. We're designing this aircraft to absorb damage and keep flying. Armament? 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 400 rounds per gun. That's 2,400 rounds total, enough to shred anything it hits. Pritchard did the mathematics in his head. This aircraft would never outturn a Zero. It was too heavy, too committed to pilot protection. But it didn't need to outturn the Zero. It needed to kill the Zero before the Zero could bring its maneuverability to bear. It's not a dogfighter, he said. No, it's an assassin. Climb above the enemy, dive, fire, climb back to altitude, never engage in a turning fight, use speed and altitude as weapons. The Japanese will call it cowardly. Aldrich's expression didn't change. The Japanese can call it whatever they want. Our pilots will call it going home alive. Pritchard looked at the blueprints for a long time. Then he nodded. Build it. I'll test it, and God help any Zero that gets in front of those 650s. The aircraft that emerged from Grumman's factory in Bethpage, New York, was designated F6F-3. The pilots who first saw it called it the Hellcat, though no one could quite remember who coined the name. It stuck. The Hellcat was not elegant, not in the way the Zero was refined. It was functional, purposeful, built with the aesthetic sensibility of a sledgehammer, but it worked. Lieutenant Commander Nathaniel Cartwright saw his first Hellcat in May 1943 at Naval Air Station Jacksonville. He was 26 years old, lean and sun-darkened, with a scar on his left forearm from bailing out over the Coral Sea a year earlier. He had flown Wildcats in the early months of the war. He had survived when many had not. The survival had cost him things he didn't talk about. His wingman, Eddie Brooks, had died in flames over the Coral Sea, while Cartwright watched from his parachute, helpless and descending and alive. Eddie had been 23. His screams had lasted 14 seconds on the radio. Cartwright had counted every one. The Hellcat sat on the tarmac like a challenge. Cartwright walked around it, touching the metal skin, peering into the cockpit. It was bigger than the Wildcat, heavier. The engine cowling looked like it could house a truck motor. What do you think? Asked the instructor, a commander named Harrison with 3 kills and a Purple Heart. I think it looks mean, Cartwright said. It is mean. Climbs like a homesick angel, dives like a brick, and those 650s will cut a Zero in half. Cartwright climbed into the cockpit. The seat was armored. He could feel the steel plate behind his back, solid and reassuring. The instrument panel was clean, logical, everything within easy reach. This was a machine built by people who understood that pilots needed to focus on fighting, not on wrestling their aircraft. He flew it that afternoon. The takeoff roll was longer than the Wildcat's all that weight, but once airborne, the Hellcat climbed aggressively the big Pratt & Whitney engine, pulling hard. At 10,000 feet, Cartwright leveled off and tried a few basic maneuvers. The aircraft was stable, solid. It didn't have the Wildcat's twitchy, nervous energy. The controls were heavier but predictable. You had to muscle it in a turn, but it went where you pointed it and stayed there. He climbed to 20,000 feet, then pushed the nose down into a dive. The airspeed built rapidly. 250 miles per hour, 300, 350. The Hellcat was rock-steady, no vibration, no buffeting. At 400 miles per hour, Cartwright pulled back on the stick. The aircraft responded immediately, the G-forces pressing him into the armored seat. 8 Gs, maybe 9. The kind of pull that would have torn a Zero's wings off. The Hellcat just climbed. Cartwright understood then what Grumman had built. Not a duelist, not an aircraft designed for graceful one-on-one combat. This was a killer, fast, tough, powerful. It would climb above the enemy, dive through them, and be gone before they could react. And if they did catch you, the armor would give you a chance. Maybe not a good chance, but better than nothing. Better than burning. The training lasted 6 weeks. Cartwright and 30 other pilots, all Wildcat veterans, learning the Hellcat's strengths and limitations. They practiced boom and zoom attacks, diving passes, energy management. The instructors drilled one lesson into them over and over: never turn fighter Zero, never give them the slow speed engagement they wanted. Use your speed, use your climb rate, use your firepower, and use the THAC weave. The weave was simple in concept, difficult in execution. 2 Hellcats flew in a section separated by perhaps 500 feet. When a Zero got on one pilot's tail, he turned toward his wingman. The wingman turned toward him. They crossed paths, forcing the Zero to choose break off the attack or fly into the second Hellcat's guns. Most Zeros broke off. The ones that didn't died. Cartwright practiced the weave until it became instinct. His wingman was a lieutenant named Kowalski, a Polish kid from Chicago, with steady hands and good eyes. They flew together every day, learning each other's timing, building the kind of trust that kept men alive. In October 1943, VF-16 deployed to the Pacific aboard the USS Lexington, 36 Hellcats, 32 pilots, the newest, most advanced carrier fighter in the world, going to war against an enemy that had dominated the sky for 2 years. Cartwright stood on the flight deck the night before their first combat mission. The Hellcat behind him was armed and fueled ready. 6 Browning 50s loaded with 2,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Each round weighed 1.7 ounces. The combined weight of fire was 26 pounds per second. He thought about the Zero. Light, graceful, deadly. He thought about the Japanese pilots who flew them, men who had been training and fighting since before Pearl Harbor. Men who believed absolutely in their superiority. The Hellcat wasn't superior, not in the ways they measured superiority. It was heavier, less maneuverable, less refined, but it would bring him home. And that, Cartwright thought, was a different kind of superiority altogether. November 11th, 1943, 7:38 in the morning, 23,000 feet above Tarawa Atoll. The radio crackled. Tally-ho, bandits 11 o'clock low, count 18 Zeeks. Cartwright keyed his mic. Roger, VF-16 attack formation, maintain altitude advantage. 12 Hellcats against 18 Zeros. The numbers favored the enemy, but numbers weren't everything. Below at 12,000 feet, the Zero formation was strung out not particularly tight. They were escorting bombers heading for the American positions on Tarawa. The Zeros looked small from this altitude, like toys, like models, but Cartwright knew better. Each one was flown by a man who believed he was invincible. Time to test that belief. Section leaders, pick your targets. Diving attack. Do not repeat. Do not engage in turning combat. Hit and climb. Execute. The Hellcats rolled into their dives. Simultaneously, 12 aircraft nose down, accelerating. Cartwright felt the familiar pressure of negative G, his body lifting slightly against the harness. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 20,000 feet. 18. 15. The airspeed climbed. 280 miles per hour. 320. 380. The Zeros grew from toys to aircraft. Cartwright selected one on the formation's edge, slightly separated from the others. Perfect. He thumbed the gun switch to fire, felt the subtle change in resistance. 400 miles per hour now. The Hellcat's wings were singing, the whole airframe vibrating with speed. The Zero ahead was still unaware its pilot focused forward, watching for threats from altitude. 600 feet. Cartwright's hands were steady. The gun sight pipper settled on the Zero's fuselage just behind the cockpit. Lid it slightly. Account for closure rate. Trust the training. He squeezed the trigger. The Hellcat shuddered as all 6 50s fired simultaneously. The sound was a continuous roar, impossibly loud even through the engine noise. Tracers arced ahead, a river of light converging on the target. The Zero's engine exploded, not caught fire, exploded. One moment it was an aircraft, the next it was fragments tumbling through space, trailing smoke and flame. The pilot never had time to react. 1.8 seconds of fire, 180 rounds expended, 1 Zero destroyed. Cartwright pulled back hard, climbing converting speed back into altitude. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. Grey crept in at the edges of his vision. He held the pull, watching the altimeter climb. 15,000 feet, 18, 21. Below and behind, the dogfight had devolved into chaos. The Zeros were trying to turn fight, their natural instinct. The Hellcats weren't cooperating. They stayed high dove. When they had an advantage, climbed back to safety. 2 more Zeros burning. A third, spiraling down its wing, torn off by 50 caliber fire. Cartwright heard Kowalski on the radio, his voice tight but controlled. 3 on my 6, 3 on my 6. Brake left, I'm coming in. The THAC weave in action. Kowalski turned hard toward Cartwright's position. The 3 Zeros followed their pilots, convinced they had an easy kill. Cartwright dove from above and behind. The lead Zero filled his gun sight. He fired. The Zero's tail section disintegrated. The aircraft tumbled out of control. The other two Zeros broke off climbing, trying to regain energy. They were good pilots. They recognized the trap. But Cartwright and Kowalski had altitude and speed now. The Zeros couldn't catch them. The fight lasted 12 minutes. When the radio crackled, "Ceasefire, ceasefire, bandits withdrawing," Cartwright looked around for survivors. 7 Zeros remained. 11 had gone down. Not a single Hellcat was missing. One had damage, a few bullet holes in the wing, but it was flying controllable, heading back to the carrier. Cartwright formed up his section and turned for home. The Hellcat flew straight and true, the engine purring. 23,000 feet below the ocean was a blue infinity. Somewhere down there, Japanese pilots were in the water if they'd survived. Most probably hadn't. The Zero didn't have much flotation. He thought about that. 11 men gone. 11 pilots who had trained as hard as he had, who loved flying as much as he did, who believed in their aircraft and their cause. Dead now, because the Hellcat could do things the Zero couldn't, because American engineering had built a machine that favored survival over refinement. Cartwright didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. Rabaul. That same evening, Kenji Tanaka sat on his cot in the pilot's quarters, his hands shaking. He had landed 30 minutes ago. The ground crew was still patching the bullet holes in his Zero's wing. 11 holes. He had counted them. 3 of his classmates hadn't come back. The new American fighter the Hellcat intelligence called it was nothing like they'd been told. It wasn't slow. It wasn't clumsy. It was methodical, relentless, terrifying. They came from above, always above, diving so fast the Zeros couldn't follow, firing for just a second or two, long enough to destroy, then climbing back out of reach. Kenji had tried to pursue one. His Zero couldn't match the climb rate. The Hellcat just went up and vanished into the sun. And when the Hellcat's guns hit aircraft came apart. Yamamoto's plane had folded in half, the fuselage breaking behind the cockpit. Sato's had simply exploded there 1 second and gone the next. Kenji had seen neither pilot escape. He found Yamada in the instructor's quarters, sitting at a small desk, reading by lamplight. The older man looked up as Kenji entered. The scarred right eye socket was in shadow. The left eye was dark, unreadable. "Sensei," Kenji said. His voice cracked. He was 19 years old, and he felt about 12. "Sit," Yamada said quietly. Kenji sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the tropical night was alive with insect sounds. Somewhere distant, a transport plane's engines droned. "Tell me," Yamada said. Kenji told him everything. The altitude disadvantage, the diving attacks, the speed, the guns that tore Zeros apart, the inability to pursue, to engage, to fight on their terms. When he finished, Yamada was silent for a long time. "Sensei," Kenji finally asked, "the intelligence report, was it accurate?" "Yes." "Then why—" Kenji stopped, unsure how to phrase the question. "Why did we laugh?" Yamada finished. He set down the paper he'd been reading. "Because we believed our skill was sufficient. Because we believed the Zero's advantages would overcome the Hellcat's weight. Because we were certain." "And now?" Yamada looked at him with that single, dark eye. "Now I am less certain. The Americans have built something we did not expect. Not a better Zero, something different. A machine that doesn't fight the way we fight, that doesn't value what we value. What do? We adapt, we train harder, we teach the new pilots everything we know. We find the Hellcat's weaknesses and exploit them, and we pray that courage and skill still matter." Kenji nodded, but he felt the doubt beneath Yamada's words, the same doubt that was growing in his own chest. "Get some sleep," Yamada said. "Tomorrow we fly again." Kenji stood bowed left. Behind him, Yamada sat alone in the lamplight. On the desk in front of him was a letter he'd been writing to his wife. He picked up the pen, then set it down again. What could he write? That the war was changing, that the Americans were learning, that the laughter in the tent 3 months ago might have been the last moment of certainty he would ever know. He folded the letter unfinished. Outside, the night deepened. In the morning, young pilots would take off in refined, fragile machines to face an enemy that cared nothing for refinement. Yamada closed his good eye and tried to sleep, but sleep like certainty had become a rare commodity. The Hellcat was in the sky now, and the sky would never be the same. January through March, 1944. The mathematics of war. Commander Hiroshi Nakamura stood in the operations room at Rabaul, staring at numbers that told a story he didn't want to believe. He was 45 years old, grey at the temples, with a sun flying zeros from this very base. The statistics on the clipboard in his hands were clinical, precise, damning. November 1943, 12 Hellcats engaged 18 zeros. Result 11, zeros destroyed 0. Hellcats lost. December 1943, 24 Hellcats engaged 31 zeros. Result 19 zeros, destroyed 1 Hellcat, damaged by ground fire. January 1944, 37 Hellcats engaged 42 zeros. Result 28 zeros, destroyed 0. Hellcats lost in air combat. February 1944, 53 Hellcats engaged 61 zeros. Result 41 zeros, destroyed 2 Hellcats lost. March 1944, 78 Hellcats engaged 94 zeros. Result 67 zeros, destroyed 4 Hellcats lost. The trend was clear, unmistakable, catastrophic. For every Hellcat destroyed, the Americans were killing an average of 14 zeros. The kill ratio was unsustainable. More than unsustainable, it was genocidal. Pilot losses told an even worse story. In January, Japan lost 78 carrier-qualified naval aviators. Training schools produced 43 replacements. In February 91, pilots lost 39 trained. March 104, lost 41 trained. The mathematics didn't work. Every month, the deficit grew. The pool of experienced pilots, men with 500, 700, 1,000 hours, was being drained. Replaced by boys with 120 hours. Boys like Kenji Tanaka's classmates. Before the war, before everything changed, 120 hours wouldn't have qualified them for solo flight. Now Nakamura was sending them into combat against Hellcats. He set down the clipboard and walked to the window. Outside, Zeros were taking off a training flight. His son was out there somewhere, 20 years old, 147 hours flight time, eager, brave, completely unprepared for what was waiting. A knock at the door. "Enter!" Takeshi Yamada stepped inside, his scarred face impassive. "You wanted to see me, Commander?" "Sit." Yamada sat. Nakamura remained standing, looking out the window. "How many have you trained?" Nakamura asked. "Since I became an instructor, 217 students have gone through my classes." "How many are still alive?" Yamada was silent for a moment. 63, that I know of. Less than 30%. "Yes, sir." Nakamura turned from the window. "It's not your fault. You're the best instructor we have. Your students love you. They trust you, but we're asking them to fight a battle we've already lost." "I know. Do you really understand what's happening?" Nakamura picked up the clipboard, held it out. "Look at these numbers. Really look at them. We're not just losing, we're being systematically destroyed. The Hellcat isn't just a better plane, it's a different philosophy of war. And that philosophy is winning." Yamada took the clipboard, scanned the figures. His left eye tracked down the columns. His face showed nothing. "What do you want me to do?" Yamada asked finally. "Tokyo has authorized special attack tactics. Kamikaze, organized suicide strikes. They believe it's the only way to achieve favorable exchange ratios against American naval superiority." Yamada set down the clipboard very carefully. "You're asking me to train them for suicide missions. I'm telling you it's coming, whether we train them or not. I won't do it. I won't teach boys to murder themselves. Then you'll be relieved of training duties and reassigned to Japan." Yamada met Nakamura's eyes. "Good." Nakamura sat down heavily. The anger that had been building in his chest deflated into something closer to despair. "I have a son, 20 years old, flies zeros. He's here at this base. I see him every day, and every day I know I might be sending him to die in an aircraft that can't compete. What am I supposed to do with that knowledge, Commander?" Yamada had no answer. "You're a good instructor," Nakamura continued. "The best we have. But 47 of your students are dead, not because you failed them, because we're asking them to fight with swords against machine guns." "Then stop asking them." "I don't have that authority." "Neither do you." Yamada stood. "Then I'd like to request immediate reassignment to Japan." Nakamura nodded. "Granted. You'll leave in 3 days, but before you go, I want you to do something for me." "What?" "Fly one more mission, not instruction. Combat. I want you to face a Hellcat. I want you, the best pilot we have, to tell me honestly if skill is enough. Because if it is, I'll fight Tokyo on the kamikaze order. If it isn't..." He trailed off. Yamada considered this. "That's an unauthorized combat flight. I'll authorize it. Take a 0, find a Hellcat. Come back and tell me the truth. April 15th, 1944, 5:47 in the morning. Truk Lagoon. Yamada woke before dawn. The air in his quarters was thick and still heavy with impending rain. He lay on his cot for 3 minutes, listening to the breathing of other officers, the distant sound of waves against coral. He was 29 years old. He felt twice that. He rose, dressed in his flight suit. The one he wasn't supposed to wear anymore. He walked to the flight line as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. 3 zeros sat on the hard stand. Model 52. The latest variant. He approached the nearest one, ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was cool, slick with morning dew. A maintenance chief appeared. Commander Yamada, sir, you're not authorized for flight operations. The aircraft is fueled. Yes, sir, but... Then I'm taking it. The chief saw something in Yamada's face. He stepped back. I didn't see you, sir. The engine started on the second pull. Yamada let it warm, watching the oil pressure climb, the temperature stabilize. Everything by the book. Everything the way he'd done it 1,000 times. He taxied to the runway without clearance, took off into the rising sun and climbed to 18,000 feet, southeast, away from known patrol routes, into open ocean. The morning was clear, the visibility unlimited. Below the Pacific stretched in every direction, blue and indifferent. Yamada flew for 47 minutes. Then he saw it, a lone Hellcat, 5,000 feet below, heading northwest, either reconnaissance or a fighter separated from formation. The Hellcat's wings were clean, no bombs, no drop tanks. Yamada pushed the stick forward and dove. The 0 accelerated quickly, 180 knots to 240 to 280. At 300 knots, the controls stiffened. Yamada trimmed nose down, keeping the Hellcat in sight. The American pilot saw him. The Hellcat turned positioning for a head-on pass. Yamada's mind shifted into combat mode, the place he hadn't been in 18 months. He pulled out of the dive at the Hellcat's altitude, 15,000 feet airspeed, bleeding to 220 knots. Perfect. His domain. He turned inside the Hellcat's turn, tightening the radius. The 0 responded like a dancer. Within 3 seconds, Yamada had the advantage positioning for a deflection shot. But the Hellcat didn't continue the turn. It rolled wings level and dove. Yamada followed. The 0 pitched nose down, chasing. The Hellcat pulled away, 800 feet to 1,200 to 1,600. The gap opened. At 12,000 feet, the Hellcat pulled up hard, converting speed into altitude. Yamada pulled up too, but the Hellcat was already above him, climbing at an impossible angle. Yamada tried to follow. Full military power, 2,600 RPM manifold pressure pegged. But the Hellcat climbed faster. At 10,000 feet, it was 2,000 feet above him. At 8,000, 3,500 feet above. Then it rolled over and came back down. Yamada saw the dive coming. He broke left hard, maximum turn rate. The Hellcat screamed past behind him, not firing, just demonstrating. It had the speed to catch him in the dive, the climb rate to escape him in the vertical, the structural strength to outpull him at high speed. The only thing it couldn't do was turn with him at low speed, so it didn't try. The Hellcat climbed again back to 20,000 feet and leveled off. Yamada was at 15,000, breathing hard, his heart hammering. He had lost. Completely. The Hellcat pilot could attack or leave at will. Yamada had no say in the matter. The engagement had lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. In that time, Yamada had executed every maneuver perfectly, every trick he knew. 64 victories worth of experience applied flawlessly. None of it mattered. The Hellcat turned away and accelerated northwest toward Truk. The pilot had let him live. Professional courtesy, maybe? Or maybe Yamada simply wasn't worth the ammunition. Yamada turned back toward Truk. The fuel gauge showed 68 gallons remaining. 93 minutes of flight time at cruise. He had margin. He flew in silence alone with thoughts that felt like stones. He had done everything right. Every maneuver executed perfectly. He was without question the better pilot. More skilled, more experienced, more attuned to his aircraft. And none of it mattered. The Hellcat pilot didn't need to be better. He needed to be adequate. The machine handled the rest. Speed, climb rate, firepower, armor. All the things Yamada had been taught didn't matter. Those things mattered. They mattered more than skill. He landed at Truk 93 minutes after takeoff. Nakamura was waiting. "Unauthorized flight," Nakamura said. "Yes, sir." "Why?" "I needed to know if I could still fight them, if skill was enough." "And Yamada looked at the Zero, then at Nakamura. It isn't. You were right. We're fighting with swords against rifles. Nakamura nodded slowly. The kamikaze order. I still won't train them for it, but I understand why it's coming. When your pilots can't win, you turn the pilot into the weapon. Your reassignment to Japan is approved. You leave in 3 days. Yamada spent those 3 days with Kenji Tanaka. Kenji had survived 7 months of combat operations, 23 missions, 4 confirmed kills. He was thin now, hollow-faced, his eyes older than his 19 years. On the evening of April the 17th, they sat together on a coral outcropping overlooking the lagoon. The sun was setting, bleeding from gold to red to purple. "Sensei is leaving?" Kenji said. "Yes." "Because of the special attack order?" "Partly. Also because I can't teach you to beat the Hellcat. I don't know how." "Will you come back?" "I don't know." Kenji picked up a piece of coral, turned it over in his hands. "We lost 6 today, out of 12. The Americans had Hellcats and Corsairs. We never had a chance. They just picked us apart like we were targets. I'm sorry." "Don't be. You taught me everything you could. It's not your fault the war changed." Yamada reached into his flight suit and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was an omamori, a protective charm worn and faded. His wife had given it to him before China 8 years ago. "This protected me through 64 victories and 1 bullet to the head," Yamada said. "I want you to have it." Kenji stared at the charm. "Sensei, I can't." "Yes, you can. You will, and you will survive, Kenji. You will live through this war. You will go home. You will have a family. You will grow old. That is an order." Kenji took the omamori with trembling hands. "What if I can't obey that order?" "Then disobey, but try. Please try." They sat together as darkness fell. Neither spoke. The war would continue. The Hellcats would come. Young men would die in aircraft that couldn't save them. On April 20th, Yamada boarded a transport to Japan. Kenji stood on the airfield watching the plane taxi. Yamada looked out the window, saw him standing there straight and still. He raised one hand. Kenji returned the salute. The transport lifted off, climbing into the morning sun. Yamada watched Truk recede below. Somewhere down there, Kenji Tanaka was walking back to quarters, an omamori in his pocket, preparing for another mission. Yamada closed his eye and tried not to think about statistics. June 18th, 1944, aboard USS Lexington, Philippine Sea. Nathaniel Cartwright sat in the ready room with 11 other pilots listening to the intelligence briefing. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. "Intelligence estimates between 400 and 500 enemy aircraft," the briefing officer said. "Mix of Zeros, Judy's, Jill's, Val's. They'll be targeting the carriers. Task Force 58 will have approximately 600 fighters available for defense, including 475 Hellcats." Nearly 1-to-1 odds, but the Japanese were desperate now. Desperate men did unpredictable things. "We'll have radar coverage out to 150 miles. Fighter directors will vector you to intercepts. Maintain altitude advantage. Use your speed. Standard doctrine applies." After the briefing, Cartwright walked to the flight deck. The sun was setting, the ocean turning from blue to gold. His Hellcat sat chained to the deck, fueled and armed. Somewhere out there, Japanese pilots were preparing the same way. Men he didn't know would never meet, but who were no different from him in the ways that mattered. Most of them wouldn't survive tomorrow. Kowalski appeared beside him. "Thinking about tomorrow?" "Always." "We'll be fine. The Hellcat's got us covered." "It's not us I'm thinking about." Kowalski lit a cigarette. "You feel sorry for them?" "Don't you?" "They started this, Pearl Harbor. A lot of good men died before we could fight back." Cartwright understood that, but sympathy felt like the only sane response to what was coming. "Get some sleep," Kowalski said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." June 19th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning, Rabaul. Kenji Tanaka woke to the sound of engines, not the usual pre-dawn maintenance, but dozens of engines starting simultaneously. The entire base was alive. He dressed quickly, ran to operations. Chaos. Pilots crowding around maps, pointing, shouting. Commander Nakamura at the center. "Operation A-Go is commencing," Nakamura announced. 450 aircraft will attack the American carrier force. We launch in 90 minutes. Kenji felt his stomach tighten. 450 aircraft. Against how many Hellcats? The briefing continued. Attack routes, timing, radio procedures, voices that tried to sound confident and failed. Kenji walked to the flight line. His Zero was being fueled armed. He reached into his pocket, touched the omamori. Yamada's charm. "Please," he whispered, "just once more." At 6:30, the first wave launched. 69 aircraft. Kenji led a showtie of 3 Zeros escort for the bombers. They flew east toward the American fleet. Kenji checked his instruments. Fuel 135 gallons, round trip to target 3 hours, 30 minutes estimated. Combat reserve 45 minutes needed. Return margin 30 minutes. Tight, but workable. The formation climbed to 18,000 feet and droned east across an ocean that looked peaceful and utterly indifferent. Kenji checked his guns, armed. He checked his wingmen, in position. He checked the sky, empty, for now. Behind him, somewhere in Japan, Takeshi Yamada was grounded, teaching students who would never match the men they were replacing. Ahead, Nathaniel Cartwright was climbing into a Hellcat preparing to defend his carrier. And between them, Kenji Tanaka flew toward the largest air battle in history, carrying a charm that had saved one man's life 64 times. He wondered if it had any miracles left. June 19th, 1944. 7:25 a.m., USS Lexington Combat Information Center. Vampire, bearing 265, range 140 miles. Angels unknown, many bogies. The radar operator's voice cut through the CIC. Commander Wallace Pritchard, now serving as fighter director, leaned over the scope. The screen showed a massive formation inbound, not a raid, an armada. Scramble all fighters, Vector 270, climb to Angels 25. This is not a drill. On the flight deck, organized chaos. 82 Hellcats launching in 11 minutes. Cartwright's division was airborne in 7, climbing hard into the morning sun. Blue leader, this is Big Blue. Vector 270 Angels 25 bogies at 140 miles, closing fast. Cartwright acknowledged, pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat climbed at 3,500 feet per minute, the big R-2800 engine bellowing. Around him, his division formed up, Kowalski on his wing. 2 more Hellcats stepped up and behind. At 25,000 feet, they leveled off and accelerated northwest. The morning was crystalline clear, unlimited visibility. Below the ocean was a blue mirror. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, 69 Japanese aircraft were coming to kill them. 7:48 a.m. First contact. Tally-ho, bandits. 11 o'clock, low Angels, 12. Count 40 plus. Cartwright saw them. A formation of Zeros and dive bombers stepped up from 10,000 to 14,000 feet. They looked organized, disciplined, professional. Blue Division attack formation. We go in high. Pick your targets. Remember your training. The 4 Hellcats nosed over into a 45-degree dive. From Kenji's perspective, the Hellcats appeared from nothing. One moment the sky was empty, the next 4 dark shapes were screaming down from the sun at impossible speed. Break left, Kenji shouted into the radio. The formation scattered. Too late. The first Zero exploded at 7:48:17. Engine hit fuel tank, ignited, aircraft disintegrated. Pilot killed instantly. Kenji broke hard left, pulling the Zero into a maximum rate turn. His wingman Sato tried to follow. A Hellcat dove through the space between them, fired a 2-second burst, and Sato's aircraft folded in half. The fuselage broke behind the cockpit. The Zero tumbled, spilling parts. Kenji saw Sato's face through the canopy eyes, wide mouth open. Then the aircraft inverted and fell. No parachute. Kenji's hands were shaking. He forced them steady, scanned for threats. More Hellcats diving. 8 now. 12. 20. They came from everywhere and nowhere, appearing at 400 miles per hour, firing, climbing back to altitude before the Zeros could respond. Another Zero burning. Another spiraling down wing torn off. Kenji counted 6 Zeros gone in 90 seconds. He tried to climb to gain altitude to fight back. The Zero clawed upward engine at full power. But the Hellcats above were faster. They stayed high, untouchable, diving only when they had perfect shots. At 7:52, Kenji got his chance. A Hellcat made a mistake, stayed low after a pass, pulled into a climb that wasn't quite steep enough. Kenji was there, turning inside, lining up a deflection shot. He fired. 3 seconds, 90 rounds. The bullets hit. Kenji saw strikes on the Hellcat's fuselage wing root tail. But the aircraft didn't explode, didn't catch fire, didn't even seem to notice. The Hellcat just kept climbing. Kenji's rounds had hit armor plate. 212 pounds of steel between him and the American pilot. The Zero's 7.7mm machine guns might as well have been throwing pebbles. The Hellcat reached altitude, rolled over, and came back down. Kenji broke right hard, pulling until gray tinged his vision. The Hellcat didn't follow the turn. It just extended away, climbed again, reset. hunting, patient, methodical. At 7:54, Kenji's second wingman died. Watanabe's Zero took a burst from below the 50 caliber rounds, walking up the fuselage from tail to cockpit. The aircraft nosed over and went in vertically. Impact with the ocean at 300 miles per hour. Kenji was alone now, his show tie of 3 reduced to 1 in 6 minutes. Fuel 108 gallons remaining, distance to Guam 73 miles. Flight time 37 minutes. Fuel time remaining at current consumption 62 minutes. He had margin. Barely. The formation, what remained of it, was disintegrating. Individual Zeros running for Guam for truck, for anywhere that wasn't here. The bombers were jettisoning their loads early, turning back. The mission was a failure. Complete. Catastrophic. Kenji pointed his Zero toward Guam and ran. Behind him, the sky was full of smoke and falling aircraft. None of them were Hellcats. Cartwright's Hellcat climbed back to 23,000 feet. Below the ocean was dotted with debris and oil slicks. The Japanese formation had ceased to exist as a cohesive unit. His gun camera would show 2 kills, maybe 3. It didn't matter. What mattered was that his division was intact, his wingman was alive, and they still had fuel and ammunition for the next wave, because there would be a next wave, and a wave after that. Blue Division reform on me. Return to Cap Station. Well done. Professional, calm, like it was a training exercise, but Cartwright's hands were shaking slightly as he throttled back to cruise. He'd just killed 2 men, maybe 3. He'd watched them burn, spin, fall. The Hellcat had brought him through untouched, not a single hit. The armor, the speed, the system, all of it working exactly as designed. He thought about the Zero pilot who'd gotten a shot at him. The rounds had hit his fuselage. He'd felt them dull thuds transmitted through the airframe, but the armor had stopped them. The pilot probably didn't even know his guns couldn't penetrate. The Zero had been flown well. The pilot was skilled. It didn't matter. System versus individual. The system had won. Kenji landed at Guam at 8:43 a.m. The fuel gauge read empty, actually 2.7 gallons, 4 minutes of flight time remaining. He'd cut it that close. The ground crew swarmed the aircraft, bullet holes in the wings, 11 of them, damage to the tail. But the Zero had brought him home. Kenji climbed out on legs that wouldn't stop shaking. A commander he didn't know was shouting questions. How many lost? What happened? Where's the rest of the formation? Kenji couldn't answer. He walked away from the Zero, away from the questions, and vomited into the coral dust. Of the 69 aircraft in the first wave, 27 returned to Guam. 42 destroyed. The second wave launched at 10 a.m. 130 aircraft, 98 destroyed. The third wave at 11:30, 47 aircraft, 40 destroyed. The fourth wave at 1 p.m., 82 aircraft, 73 destroyed. By 3 o'clock p.m. Operation A-Go was over. Total Japanese losses, 315 aircraft destroyed, 2 carriers sunk, hundreds of pilots dead. American losses, 29 aircraft, 23 to anti-aircraft fire, 6 to air combat. The kill ratio 52-1. An American pilot surveying the carnage keyed his radio and said words that would become legend. Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot back home. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The day Japanese naval aviation died. June 22nd, 1944. Rabaul. Kenji Tanaka stepped off the transport that had brought him back from Guam. 3 days after the battle. One of 12 survivors from 127 pilots deployed. He walked across the airfield in a daze. The heat was crushing, the sun too bright. Then he saw him. Yamada. Standing beside the operations building. He shouldn't have been there. He was supposed to be in Japan. Their eyes met across 100 meters of coral and heat shimmer. Yamada ran. Kenji had never seen him run, not in 2 years. They met in the middle of the airfield. Yamada grabbed Kenji's shoulders, looked at him with that single, piercing eye. "I thought you were dead," Yamada said. His voice cracked. "I heard the numbers. I thought I'd killed you. I thought teaching you to fight like samurai had killed you." Kenji couldn't speak. He just shook his head. Yamada pulled him into an embrace. Kenji felt the older man shaking, or maybe that was him, maybe both. "I'm sorry," Yamada whispered. "I taught you wrong. I taught you to be warriors when I should have taught you to survive." "You didn't teach me wrong, Sensei. You taught me to fly, to fight, to be—" Kenji's voice broke. "Everyone else is dead. Sato, Watanabe, Yoshida. All of them. I'm the only one left. You survived. That's what matters. Is it? They were braver than me, better than me. They fought to the end. I ran. You were smart. Running isn't cowardice when the battle is already lost. Living to fight another day isn't dishonor. But Kenji heard the doubt in Yamada's voice, the same doubt that was eating him from inside. June 25th, 1944. Commander's briefing. Nakamura stood before the assembled pilots. His face was carved from stone. Effective immediately. Special attack tactics are authorized for all units. Pilots will volunteer for organized strikes against enemy vessels. Training will commence next week. Silence in the room. Kamikaze, someone whispered. Yamada stood. I object. This is not Bushido. This is murder. We don't. You are relieved of duty, Commander Yamada. Nakamura cut him off. You will return to Japan immediately. This conversation is over. Yamada looked around the room. Young faces, scared faces, Kenji's face. He bowed once to Nakamura and walked out. Kenji found him that evening packing his few possessions. Sensei, I'm going to volunteer. Yamada stopped packing. Don't. I have to. Everyone I flew with is dead. I should have died with them. This is my chance to murder yourself, to prove you're brave. You've already proven that. Surviving when everyone else died, that takes more courage than dying. The war is lost, Sensei. We both know it. The Hellcat proved it. If I'm going to die anyway, I want it to mean something. Yamada grabbed Kenji's shoulders the same way he had on the airfield. Listen to me. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to die for Japan. Japan will survive whether you live or die. But your mother won't survive losing you. Your family needs you to come home. My family needs Japan to survive. Japan will survive. It will survive defeat. It will rebuild. But it needs men like you alive to do that. Don't throw your life away on a gesture. Kenji pulled away. I've made my decision. He turned and walked out. Yamada stood alone in the empty room looking at the omamori Kenji had left on the desk. The charm hadn't saved him. It had saved Kenji, for now. April 6th, 1945. 10 months later. Kenji Tanaka climbed into a Zero for the last time. The aircraft was loaded with a 250-kilogram bomb. There was fuel for a one-way trip. He was 20 years old. He would never be 21. The omamori was in his pocket. Yamada's charm. It had protected him through 8 more months of combat. 31 missions, 7 kills. More than anyone had expected. But the war was ending. Everyone knew it. The Americans were at Okinawa. Japan was burning. The Hellcat, joined now by Corsairs and Mustangs, ruled the sky absolutely. There was no path to victory, only paths to death. Kamikaze offered a path with meaning, or so they said. Kenji didn't believe it, but he was tired. So tired. All his friends were dead. The aircraft he loved was obsolete. The war he'd been trained for didn't exist anymore. The engine started. He taxied to the runway. 30 minutes later, he dove his Zero into the destroyer USS Haggard. The impact killed 11 American sailors. The explosion consumed Kenji instantly. His body was never recovered. The omamori, blown clear in the explosion, floated on the surface for 3 hours before sinking. On April 8, 1945, in a small apartment in Tokyo, Takeshi Yamada heard the news. Kenji Tanaka killed in action. Kamikaze strike. Died honorably for the Emperor. Yamada sat down on the floor of his empty apartment and didn't move for 6 hours. When he finally stood, something inside him had broken that would never heal. October 15th, 1945, Tokyo. Takeshi Yamada returned to a city that no longer existed. The firebombing of March 10th had killed 100,000 people in a single night. His wife and daughter were among them. He learned this from a clerk at the demobilization center who read it from a list the way you'd read a grocery order. Yamada made no sound. He simply walked out of the building and into the ruins. He had survived. 64 victories, 1 bullet to the head, 4 hours and 47 minutes flying dead, 18 months of training pilots who died in aircraft that couldn't compete. He had survived. His wife hadn't. His daughter hadn't. His students hadn't. Survival wasn't victory. It was just survival. He found work as a mechanic at a small garage in the Shibuya district. The owner didn't care about his military record. He cared that Yamada understood engines. Yamada worked there for 29 years. He fixed cars. He came home to an empty apartment. He drank shochu alone and tried not to think about the war. He never flew again. June 12, 1967, Tokyo. An American walked into the garage. Mid-40s, sun-weathered with the bearing of a former military man. He drove a rental car with a sputtering engine. Carburetor troubled, the American said in rough Japanese. Yamada nodded, popped the hood, made the diagnosis in 30 seconds. Dirt in the fuel line. Simple fix. They didn't speak while Yamada worked, but as the American paid, he noticed the small model 0 on Yamada's workbench. "You build models?" the American asked. "I used to fly them," Yamada replied in halting English. The American's posture changed. Recognition. "What did you fly?" "A 6M0, Imperial Navy, 1941 to 1943. I flew F-6F Hellcats, 1943 to 1946. USS Lexington." Silence stretched between them, not hostile, just heavy, weighted with things neither could say. "You were at Philippine Sea?" Yamada asked. "Yes." "June 19th, 1944. I lost many students that day." Nathaniel Cartwright, for it was him, nodded slowly. "I'm sorry."
Gee, don't be. You did your job. We did ours. The Hellcat was... Yamada searched for the English words. Better weapon system. Not better airplane. Better system. Your Zero was a beautiful machine. Yes, but beauty doesn't win wars. Survival wins wars. Your Hellcat understood that. Our Zero did not. Cartwright set down money for the repair, then added extra. For the work, and for the conversation. You don't need to... I do. I've thought about you, all of you. Every Zero I shot down, I wondered who was inside, if they had families, if they loved flying the way I did. Yamada looked at him with that single dark eye. We did. We loved it. They shook hands. Cartwright left. Yamada watched him drive away, then returned to work. They never met again.
April 7th, 1974, Tokyo Medical University Hospital. Takeshi Yamada lay in a bed that smelled of disinfectant and approaching death. Liver cancer terminal. The doctors gave him 2 weeks. That had been 3 weeks ago. He was 59 years old. He looked 80. A nurse brought him water he couldn't drink, asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. What he needed was in the drawer beside the bed. The omamori, Kenji's charm. Yamada's charm. A fisherman had found it off Okinawa in 1958, mailed it to the address sewn inside. Yamada had carried it every day for 16 years. "Sensei." He looked up. Hallucination, probably. The morphine. But Kenji stood beside the bed, 19 years old, wearing his flight suit. "I'm sorry," Yamada whispered. "I failed you." "You didn't fail me, Sensei. You taught me to fly. You taught me to fight. You taught me to love the sky. I taught you to die. We were all going to die. The war made sure of that, but you gave me 2 extra years. You taught me to survive when everyone else was dying. That's not failure. You died anyway. Everyone dies, Sensei, but some of us fly first." Yamada closed his eye. When he opened it, Kenji was gone. The nurse found him 3 hours later. His hand was clutched around the omamori. His face was peaceful. Takeshi Yamada died on April 7th, 1974, 32 years to the day after the Doolittle raid. His last words, according to the nurse, were in Japanese. "Tell them the Zero was beautiful. Tell them we tried." July 14th, 1998, San Diego, California. Nathaniel Cartwright died of a heart attack while watching his grandson's Little League game. He was 80 years old. His final tally, 34 victories, Navy Cross, Distinguished Flying Cross, 211 combat missions, 0 times shot down. The Hellcat had brought him home every time. At his funeral, they buried him with full military honors. In his coffin beside the flag, his family placed a photograph of his Hellcat and a small omamori he'd bought in Tokyo in 1967. He'd never explained why he carried it, but he'd carried it every day for 31 years. His widow found his war diary after he died. The last entry, written in 1967, "Met a Japanese mechanic today. He flew Zeros. We talked for 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I understood more about the war than in all the years since. He said the Hellcat was a better weapons system. He's right. But I wonder if we lost something when we chose the system over the art. We won, but they flew with something we didn't have. Something pure. I'm glad we won, but I wish I'd known them before the war. I think we would have been friends. The F-6F Hellcat. Total production 12,275 aircraft. Combat service June 1943 to August 1945. Air victories 5,223 enemy aircraft destroyed. Percentage of US Navy/Marine total, kills 56%, Hellcats lost in air combat 270. Overall kill ratio 19.3 to 1. Aces created 305 pilots. Nickname the Ace Maker, the Mitsubishi A6M0. Total production 10,000 aircraft. Combat service 1940 to 1945. Kill ratio 1941 to 1942, 12-1 in its favor. Kill ratio 1943 to 1945, 8-1 against it, asterisk turning point. Introduction of the F-6F Hellcat. The philosophy, the zero, represented the culmination of a belief that pilot skill, when perfectly matched with an aircraft designed for pure performance, could overcome any advantage in armor firepower or industrial production. The Hellcat represented a different belief that war is not won by individual warriors, no matter how skilled, but by systems that keep those warriors alive long enough to learn to improve, to come home. In the end, both philosophies were proven correct within their contexts. The Zero was right that skill matters, that art matters, that the purity of design matters. The Hellcat was right that survival matters more. Every Japanese pilot who survived the Pacific War carried the same truth. At some point, a Hellcat pilot had them in his sights and chose not to fire. Chose mercy. Chose humanity. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at the enemy's discretion. But it is also the ultimate victory, because mercy in the end proved that men were more than their machines. The Hellcat won the war, but the Zero won something else. Respect, admiration, a permanent place in history as one of the most refined aircraft ever designed. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps in a war where 50 million died, the fact that some chose mercy, that some chose to let the enemy live, is the only victory worth remembering. The sky belongs to no one and everyone. The samurai and the machine both flew through it. Only one came home, but both left their mark on the clouds.